Okay, if you had a chance to watch the inside edition of what I did for how to get rid of Christmas trees, there are a lot of comments that came along with that. They were in the thousands. Absolutely in the thousands. Really, really exciting. Some of them were goofy. Some of them were nice. Some of them were really captivated by my looks. Which, I see myself every day. I don't see myself like that. But anyway, there were certain questions that came up that really kind of fascinated me. Now, we were talking about trees, and it was very clear that we were talking about trees that were cut down. Of course, when you saw the video of that, it made a whole lot more sense. But anyway, here we are looking at this, and one of the questions was, can't I just replant my Christmas tree for next Christmas? All right, now I laughed at that the first time around because it just seems so absurd. But when the question kept coming up over and over again, I'm thinking to myself, people really don't know. People just don't know. Okay, when you take a tree that is the size of a Christmas tree, and I don't care if it's a cut tree that's 3 feet or a cut tree that's 30 feet. I don't care what you do to it. You cannot take it and replant it into the ground. It's not going to live. You have severed the roots. You have cut all ties with what it needs to grow within that soil. So therefore, no, you cannot replant that Christmas tree because there's no life-sustaining abilities for that plant to take up and take off. Now, you may be able to slow it down just slightly because it would be getting some extra moisture inside, but it's not the type of plant that will create new roots. It just doesn't happen that way. The next one is, I recently saw a segment that made coasters with the trunk of a Christmas tree. Won't the sap get all over the table? Yes, it will. If you take, and that's what, I'll put it this way. It was interesting because we just didn't have enough time to discuss into detail all the nitty gritty of what should be happening within whatever we were talking about. Let me give you a good example. If you notice in the segment, myself and the gal that I was with, we went and we wore gloves. Very important to wear gloves when you handle the Christmas tree because when you bought that thing, it wasn't bleeding as much as it is as when you end up taking it down. And it bleeds sap. Christmas trees are pretty much sappy trees. And I'm not talking the crying tree. They are sappy trees. So if you're going to be taking and making game pieces, as I had suggested, you can make checkers out of the trunks. You could make buttons out of the trunks, the branches. You could make the coasters out of them. They can and they will bleed. It is probably best to allow them to sit for 3-4 months for them to bleed out, dry out. Then you can knock off all of the sap that came out of it and then use them the way they are, or even better still, take some shellac and shellac them up to allow it to just stay within itself. Now, if you were to take it to shellac them right away, you'd probably have a little bit of a problem because that bleeding will most likely come through the shellac. So, and there's a lot of moisture inside the tree. So that's one of the things you have to concern yourself with. Here's another one that says, I heard that people donate Christmas trees to zoos and animal sanctuaries for them to eat. Is that safe? I had the opportunity to go to film at several times actually, one of the largest zoos in the United States. And they ended up becoming a botanical garden for a very interesting reason. Number one, they have a lot of acreage. Number two, that acreage generates a lot of, or I should say they plant all kinds of different types of plants. And number three, they have those different types of plants so that they can feed them to the animals. So you're absolutely right. There are zoos and there are animal sanctuaries that would love to have that kind of stuff. You got to line all this stuff ahead of time. because sometimes they're not going to eat it if it is dry. And that's one of the problems you have with a Christmas tree, is that they end up drying out quite a bit. So therefore, you line it up ahead of time, you keep the thing hydrated as best as possible, and find out if they could still use it afterwards. There was a couple of people that wondered, and they said, can you make tea out of a Christmas tree? And the answer to that is, I really don't know. I've never seen pine needle trees tea. I've never seen pine tree tea. I've never seen the bark of pine tree. And this is the reason why I say this. It's kind of on the toxic side. And the reason why it would be on the toxic side is because pine trees is one of the elements that they'll take and they'll use and they'll create turpentine out of. So it's kind of a toxic plant over here. Therefore, if you're looking at this thing as some type of medicinal thing or for some tea, I'm pretty sure there's something else that's out there that it's a whole lot less toxic. I personally wouldn't do it. I would think that if you go to your local tea house, or if you were to go to a health food store, or if you were to go to, well, just any place like that, that would not necessarily be the best thing. I mean, they wouldn't have it out there. If they do, okay, then it's the possibility is there. But, I wouldn't go making tea out of this. I wouldn't do that. All right, here's another one. Why would anyone put a Christmas tree in the garden to make a home for bugs? Okay. There are people, and this kind of actually ties into the one before. There are people that will create essential oils, pine essential oils, out of, and not just pine trees, just a lot of, we'll just say pine trees in general. They will make essential oils out of a pine tree. But more in particular, they will take those oils and they will create something that's actually pretty unusual. And that is an insecticide out of it. There are insecticidal tendencies or things that can come out of an oil like that. And they'll take them and they usually use them around equine areas where there's horses, and they'll spray them and it puts up a barrier. And this barrier gets put up so that they cannot go through that. The insects go through that. So it's not necessarily something that kills the insects off. It just puts a barrier up to where they do not like to pass by that. So by taking a Christmas tree and putting it out there, is that going to do that? I think if you end up doing something like that, you're going to be creating more of a fire hazard than anything. Now, I would be all for doing something that's kind of cool, and that would be by taking that particular tree, placing it someplace in the yard to where it is not going to be a potential fire hazard, understanding that you're going to lose all of the modified leaves or the pine needles off of that tree, and then allow it to sit in the back of the yard someplace, and that ends up being and becoming a habitat. It'll become a habitat for squirrels, it'll be a habitat for birds, it'll be a habitat. In fact, if you want it for squirrels, you know what you could do? You could take some peanut butter and you could put some peanut butter on those branches away from where your garden is, and the squirrels will have a tendency to congregate in that area and not in your yard. So there is, and there are advantages of taking it and put it in your garden. I would just put it further away from the garden so those things like pterodactyl and all those other things can go up there and they can make their habitat or make that little tree a habitat. Just be aware of the potential fire hazard. If you want to see that whole thing and the thing that I did on Inside Edition, what you'll need to do is to just type in my name and then Inside Edition, or maybe it's Inside Edition how to recycle a tree. I don't remember. You know what you do? Just come to my Facebook page. We posted it on there. Go to my Facebook page, find the link from there, watch it, and I think that'd be kind of a fun thing for you to do.